All right, hello, welcome everyone to Star Trek from the Holodeck. This is the Lower Decks edition, and I am Michael, your host and captain of the USS Rainman Digital. And on the bridge with me is Ensign David Sabal. Hello, David.
Hello, everybody.
All right, David. So this episode, the most recent episode 6, titled Of Gods and Angels, was a fun little throwback episode yet again. That obviously that is what Lower Decks is, right?
Yeah.
A self-referential, postmodernistic extravaganza.
Mm-hmm. Especially in regards to this episode, because this episode had a lot of like bringbacks from classic Trek. I mean, one of the side characters, Ollie, is like obviously a alien race that we haven't dealt with when it comes to like Star Trek.
We don't even know their name. And you know what? That's an interesting place to start, David. Now, we're going to circle back to that, though. So
Okay.
This season, or this episode, I should say, is being looked at or viewed as a bit of a mid-season entry because it does happen to land on, of course, the mid-season, but also they're saying there are elements. And when I say they, I'm talking about Mike McMahon in various interviews, has said there's elements to this season that you're going to start seeing come together more overtly in the mid-season, and that is the fact that the characters themselves are essentially the myth arc. They don't have an overarching myth arc this season. What it is, if you think about it, is how are we going to make sure Mariner, Boimler, how are we going to get them to be fully realized characters by the end of the season? And that's what we had talked about, I believe, last episode. Like, that's kind of what they're working towards. That how are they? We even posed the questions: how are they going to do it?
Mm-hmm.
And we definitely saw all the clues that they're definitely working on those last minute character touches.
Yeah.
And that is exactly what this episode mostly worked towards. For example, having Mariner pair up with Ollie.
Yes.
The mirror image of herself from 5 years ago.
Yes.
It's to show the audience that she has matured, that she has changed, but she also is fundamentally the same happy-go-lucky, adventure-seeking ensign at heart.
She hasn't changed her core. I guess you could say her core concepts, but she's matured now.
Yeah, this is proper character development. I know there are some shows, David, that we have definitely taken the task when you have characters that are mischaracterized. For the purposes of story development and plot advancement, what they'll do is they'll take a character and change its rudimentary core foundations.
Yes.
And many times it never works because they're cheating. In order to get where they want to be, they cheat by changing a character and never really showing us how the character went from A to B to C. Whereas with this show, it's reminding us of the steps, the many steps that they've taken to get to this point. So I definitely appreciate that. And that's something that no matter if it's next year or 10 years from now, I think most of us, David, are going to look back at Lower Decks as, yeah, it's a fun show, relatively low stakes, but it was written by a powerhouse team.
Oh, yeah.
That knew how to develop characters. They knew their job. Their job was to make people laugh. But also, because Mike McMahon is a good writer, I'm also going to give you guys some actual character development. I'm going to show everyone how to write a cartoon the right way.
The right way. And that's the thing, is kind of like me and you have been going, especially going back to what we've all been wondering about is like, what is the main story arc of this final season? Is like, where's our main story arc? Where's, are they going to introduce a big bad or something for the Lower Decks crew? And it's up to this point that I'm like going, I think the main story arc is just like what you said, is like, we are watching these characters mature.
Yes, that's the center of this season. It seems
that is the center of the season, and it feels so different especially to me, because like I honestly haven't seen a show do this in a while. When it's like Lower Decks, just like you said, it's like low stakes. You're not expecting a smaller show to do something like this, where they go, we're going to actually try to really focus in on character development.
Well, making it obvious because
yeah.
you can. I mean, obviously, you can't have a show without character development, and this show has definitely had all of that. So I'm not saying that's a new element this season. I'm saying that it is very obvious that that is the focus. That is the story.
That is the story.
That's not just the behind the scenes. Hey, we want to make sure Mariner goes from A to Z by the end, and by the end, you know, she needs to fully realize what she has done. Like, that's typically how you write other seasons that don't have an end date in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas this one, it knows its end date and it is working towards that end point. And in doing so, it's making sure that the story itself is about their maturity and their growth, because when you look at the concept of the show, Lower Decks, it is about a group of people who are kind of immature, not really taken seriously. So in order for this show to really have a point, it needs to show the progress of these groups of people as well. So taking that aspect and turning into like a meta narrative, you're now saying something about your character development in a way that also fleshes out that the myth arc is the actual character development itself.
Exactly.
That's pretty fucking good, dude.
That's really, it's almost kind of like I guess because I'm so trained at this point to, whenever me and you cover shows, it's kind of like, okay, we need this part, and this part to push our season together. Whereas here, it's very different because there's no big bad. There is no like main antagonist, protagonist that we're all marching towards or going to face in the end. In a lot of ways, the big bad is the end. It's the finale. It's, okay, where do these characters go when we get to the final episode, which is episode 10?
Yeah.
And it's like, it's an inevitable big bad.
It's their own, it's themselves as obstacles.
It's themselves as obstacles. And it's actually, it hit me in this one particularly because I at first, when I saw the episode, I was a little annoyed with the episode because it just seemed like almost like a filler episode.
It's static.
It's static.
Yeah.
But then I started thinking about it. I'm like going, they didn't hint at any big bad, but in actuality, when you actually think about like all of the episodes up to this point, the big bad is the Lower Decks crew becoming mature and actually kind of becoming more than Lower Decks.
Right.
And especially when it came in this episode when they introduced a brand new character, the Ollie character. Mm-hmm. Because Ollie is supposed to be Mariner at square one. She is the reject. Like, it's amazing that basically, in a way, they created another Mariner because all the things that make Ollie will make Mariner is in Ollie. Because like she's very self-absorbed. She is not sure of herself. She's actually has a lot of social problems.
Slightly overconfident, but it's fake.
Slightly overconfident and it's fake.
Yeah.
But in this regard, Mariner's there to show her, hey, I was there too. I know where you were at because I was a reject. I was the Lower Decks. This is where they shipped me off, especially when they tied it together where Ollie was being shipped around to all these ships, and the crew of the Cerritos was the last stop before they basically said, you know what, you're not for the Federation.
It's not even Starbase 80. It's the Cerritos. That's the final stop for Ollie.
Exactly. And it's like, it's very reminiscent of Mariner's journey, and the fact that basically in the very end, I love the little touch they added where Ollie still has to spend time in the brig because she broke Federation rules, which is true. But Mariner's there to keep her company and tell her, yeah, I did this. And basically almost like Mariner is now there to kind of like show Ollie, hey, I've been there. This is where I am at now, and I'm in a much better place.
It seems like she's taken her under her wing.
Her wing.
Yeah. And David, the thing that really brought this whole idea to the forefront for me was me getting annoyed as well while I was watching the episode, because I'm a stickler. People know that for for particular norms in televisions, if a show creates a pattern, a narrative pattern, then you need to adhere to it and stick to it. So when I wasn't seeing a myth arc,
Yeah.
I was like, well, this is kind of weird because you guys always had, even though this is a very simplistic show, low stakes, it did have that narrative thread that kept everything coherent. But by the end of the episode, after looking through my notes and circling the moments that were the most interesting and obviously the aspects we were supposed to pay attention to, I realized that the through line is in fact that these people are trying to are actively progressing as characters.
Yeah.
So we already covered the Mariner aspect, but then we look at Boimler.
That one made me laugh.
They're kind of taking this aspect from the Kelvin timeline, which is one of the best things that I liked about J.J. Abrams' 3 films that he produced and directed the first one, I believe, was this idea that our characters, Spock and Kirk, were thrown into this existential despair because they were aware of their future.
Of their destiny.
And they lived in their own shadow. That was the brilliance of those films.
Oh, yeah.
It lost itself a bit in the second one, but it came back in big thematic ways in that third
and beyond.
that third film. So it started in the first, and it came to full fruition, I would say, in that third film. And that's kind of what they're doing with Boimler. They're using the alternate reality as a mirror, as a goal. And Boimler now realizes, okay, this is who I can be. That this universe isn't that different. It's very similar to ours. So that means I could in fact be this person.
I could be that person.
So you also have him now holding on to his goal. And that's what he's been working towards now since the beginning of the season. And now Rutherford has become a part of that by the end of the episode. And to Anna, she already had her moment. That's how the season started.
Oh, Tendi.
Tendi. I keep saying to Anna, that's the cat, right?
That's the cat.
Tendi, yeah. And then you have Tendi, who already had her big development and pretty much I would say they pretty much said their piece when it comes to Tendi.
With the Orions.
With those opening 2 episodes. And now all they have to do is bring her and Rutherford together in some type of romantic relationship because they're still kind of teasing that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, David. So when you take a step back and you realize that's what they're doing, that the actual myth arc, the through line is the development of characters and goals that must be reached prior. I love meta narratives as long as they're done well. This is one of those that is being done quite well. And this is the type of meta stuff I appreciate as opposed to Star Trek being aware that it's Star Trek.
Yes.
Which is what a lot of those Easter eggs and references do. It's aware of its place in science fiction. And it's aware of its place in pop culture. It's aware of its place in the cosmological canon of Star Trek itself. And those types of things I don't like in Star Trek. I don't want to be reminded that this is a fictional world. I don't want to be reminded that this is a TV show. But meta narratives are far different when it's done like this.
Well, especially, like with the Boimler stuff that I really like, which I am glad that basically me and you are kind of like on the same page of this because I saw the same thing is kind of like in a very, very strange way, they took Boimler's story and tied it to the Kelvin timeline where it was like
that idea
that basically Kirk and Spock in the Kelvin timeline knew they had this great destiny. And then you kind of get to see how all of them seem over almost like against it because they're like, oh my God, it's so much of a responsibility to live up to that destiny. Whereas here it's almost like the opposite with Boimler, where Boimler sees that and he says, no, I want that.
Yeah.
That is what I want. I'm going to do whatever it takes to get there.
It's a call to action for him.
It's a call to action for him. And that's why I like the fact that the difference between him and the Kelvin and Kirk and Spock in the Kelvin timeline, Boimler's like, no, I will do whatever it takes to get there. And if I have to make friends and become best friends with this person who's Ta'ana, the doctor, I have to find a way. How did that happen?
Okay, David, the only question I have is, because I have some ideas, but I want to get your thoughts. How is this are we retreading when it comes to the Boimler side? Because even though I can get on board with what they're doing with him this season, is this a bit of a retread from, I believe, was it the second season or third season with his duplicate?
No, because the duplicate, the difference in that story was the fact that
Let's take one step back as well before the duplicate. But even his time on the USS Titan,
yeah,
like it was too much for him. So isn't this don't we already know what happens if he continues to push himself into a position of responsibility? It's something that he ended up not wanting. Wasn't that the story?
but the difference between that's Boimler thinking this is what I definitely want, or this is what I want. He's thinking on an assumption.
Whereas now he sees that this is a real thing.
This is a real tangible goal that he has, because like just like what you said, the one time factor in that episode that they introduced this was the fact that the two universes are not that different from each other. It was like, I remember the joke was there's like a 0.99999 or something difference.
Yeah.
And like, in a way, seeing that to Boimler, it was kind of like, this is the way. This is how it's supposed to be.
I will have to reserve my full judgment on this when it comes to Boimler until I have a chance to go back, and I want to ponder the storylines from the previous seasons dealing with the USS Titan.
I'm already starting to ponder that, because that's why I'm glad you brought it up, because I was worried about that, but then I started really thinking about it. What is the difference between Boimler then?
As of right now, David, to me, it doesn't seem like much difference. And that's why it does feel kind of suspect to me. Like, why are they retreading? We've already done this type of storyline, and it didn't actually serve Boimler. He didn't enjoy it. He ran from it. So what's different between that scenario and this scenario now? Now, I'm sure there is, because Mike McMahon is not a moron. If we get to the end of the season and we can't overtly, explicitly see the differences, then I will say, shame on you, Mike McMahon, for being a moron.
Yeah.
But I want to think about that a little bit more. I think I need to go back, maybe watch a few of those choice episodes, and then come back by the end of this season and say, yes, it works because it is slightly different, or possibly it could also be reaffirming his direction. So perhaps at that time he wasn't ready because of maturity, and over the last couple seasons he has finally found himself, his confidence, because ultimately, David, I feel like that has to be a story. The iPad he's using from the other universe, the pad he's using from the other universe, is simply, I think, a tangible aspect of his character development, so that we can understand what's going on in his mind. He wants to be this person, and he's not this person. He wanted to be on the USS Titan, but realized he wasn't quite ready for it. So is the story less about the goals he wants to reach, or is it more about being true to who he is?
That's the one that I think that it's more about.
Is that what he's going to learn by the end of the season? Is it going to be, why am I trying so hard to be this guy over here when I am this guy already, and I need to make, or I should say, I should find peace with that,
because you got
and find the self-confidence to be who I am at this moment, and then doing that, understanding who I am, I will automatically and more naturally or organically fit into the box that I want to be placed in.
Exactly.
And that's, if you look at it from that perspective, that is very much a Star Trek story, being the authenticity. It's also a very existential concept as well, being true to yourself, forming yourself as you want to be. That's the ultimate hand at freedom, to shape ourselves into being what we want to be. So if that's Boimler's story by the end, which, David, I am leaning towards that more than anything, it's about him realizing that he is just enough as who he is at this moment.
Because you got to remember, since season 1, when it first started, there was a little bit of Boimler's character was about self-loathing. Like he was not happy with himself.
I wouldn't say I wouldn't say self-loathing, but I definitely say he was incredibly unhappy with his lot
with
in
his
life.
with his lot in life.
Yeah.
And like
He wanted to be appreciated. He wanted to be
Exactly.
recognized and validated.
But here now it's kind of like, for me, it's like a little different. It's like he was trying to, in the very beginning, he was trying to find that outside, appreciation from others saying, "Oh, good job, Boimler." And in this regard, it's almost like he's now trying to find like what you said, that self-worth. He needs to actually, it's up to him. It should be up to him who he becomes. And I think that's where the story is marching towards for him.
Maybe it's about resolving that inner conflict.
Yeah.
Making peace with who you are. I'm wondering if that's what the story B was about, between the squares and the circles. The idea of, it was so funny, dude. What did they name their offspring? Square Aaron or
Square
something?
Aaron.
It's so stupid. I laughed so hard because it was so stupid. I'm not quite sure. Perhaps that was a metaphor for the type of diplomacy that will bring about a type of peace, and maybe that's what they're saying about Boimler, but more of an interiority type thing, a subjective, I guess, aspect of that, finding that inner peace and accepting who you are rather than trying to be something different. And I think that has a lot to do with that story B, because what was the story? It's a very, very original series type of episode.
It is.
Where you have two. In fact, it was a lot like, I always forget the name of that episode, where the aliens had a black face.
Yeah, the black face and the
a
white
face.
Yes.
Yeah, it was very similar to that, which that episode.
Where they basically said, "Oh no, their left side is black."
Yeah, it's so obvious what they're doing, but at the same time, man, it is a powerful message.
It is.
Yeah,
It is. I mean, people look at it and go, "Oh my god, that's so cheesy." But I'm like going, "Yeah, it's cheesy, but at its core, that's what makes original Star Trek really awesome." Because Gene Roddenberry was able to take concepts like that and in a lot of ways dummy them down.
Yeah,
because whether Gene Roddenberry meant it or not, he needed to actually write to a specific audience.
Yeah. So I suppose we can look to the original series episode itself, the one with those aliens, as a means to help find meaning with what they're trying to do. And of course, if you're dealing with a story B in a series like this, story B can't just sit on its own in a void or in a vacuum. It is a part of story A as well. Usually what it does is it helps support and help the viewer with defining the meaning of story A or whatever other story it may be paired with. So obviously it has something to do with Boimler, and I believe it has something to do with a type of inner peace.
Inner peace. And that's the thing also that is one of the big strengths of Lower Decks when it comes to the writing staff and the way they've been writing the show. They have been able to actually always take their story, their separate stories in their episodes, and find some way of connecting everything. Everything connects really well in Lower Decks when you think about when it just seems to meld together really coherently.
Yeah.
And that's why every time I watch a Lower Decks episode, I always see, okay, what is that through line? What is it that basically connects story A and story B? And just like what you concluded, it's like, I think that basically the story of the spheres and the squares ties to Boimler.
And possibly even Mariner, if you're looking for that connection, because again, if we are to believe that the story of the season is themselves, the obstacles they must overcome and dodge in order to be who they want to be, or in order for them to be their authentic selves, well, then even Mariner, because look what they do with Mariner. She's also dealing with Ollie, who also, in a lot of ways, as I was saying, not in a lot of ways, she absolutely does. She's a mirror of Mariner from 5 years prior. So if you take that and you pair it directly with Mariner's inner problems as an individual, the things she has gone through, and her own resolve at finding that inner peace and finding that comfort within ourselves, well, then suddenly all of this starts to fit and make sense. So at the end of the episode, it is strategically sound, but it also is probably one of the more weaker episodes of the season.
Yes, that is the fallback to this episode, because it's kind of like to people who aren't breaking it down like me and you, this could be considered like almost like a weak episode, because it's kind of like, well, there's nothing going on.
Well, it's kind of strange that we are halfway done with the season, and yet none of the main characters outside. Okay, let's forget when I say main characters. Let's forget the Lower Decks crew themselves. Okay, our 4 leads or 5 leads. We haven't really spent time with any of the other people.
I mean,
and we have 5 episodes left. We still haven't had a whole lot. We have not had a whole lot for Rutherford yet. Okay, so but we're gonna set him aside. The new Vulcan ensign.
Yes,
we don't know what she's done this season. She wasn't even in this episode.
Yeah,
Captain Freeman, not much going on. Shax, not much going on. The engineer Billups, not much going on. This is the first season where we're 5 episodes in and we haven't really touched on these characters at all yet. And it makes me wonder, why are we slow playing this? When we don't have a myth arc, we should be finding ways to bring in these characters. If your myth arc is the obstacles that these characters must overcome, their own character flaws, then if that's your thesis, that's your myth arc, then I would think you would bring in other characters as supporting to help support that idea and push it forward.
The only reason why I think also when it comes to evidence of actually seeing that this is the myth arc, is also if you look at the last episode, particularly with Captain Freeman, technically her myth arc could have ended right there, because like by the end of the
myth arc or her story arc?
Her story arc.
Yeah.
Because like in a lot of ways, I remember me and you discussing about how we finally got to see Captain Freeman be a captain.
Right.
And she earned the chops to being called the captain of the Cerritos. So in a lot of ways, that was the end of her story arc, where it's like, okay, we fully accept Captain Freeman as the captain of the Cerritos. No one's going to replace her. No one's going to replace her at this point. You know, I don't think Mariner's going to, like, by the end of it be, you know, captaining the Cerritos. I think it's always going to be Captain Freeman.
Yeah.
But you are right. There are other characters that you're like going, well, what about these guys? I mean, like, particularly with Ransom. Ransom's been in a lot of the episodes, but nothing's going on with him, really. He's just like kind of like a microphone to say what he wants to complain about.
He is funny. I will say that they're giving him a lot more. They're giving him more screen time this season. It seems like he's definitely the connective character that's involved in a lot of people's stories and what's going on that ship. But there isn't an actual story for him. No. But I'm okay with it. I don't need a story for everyone, but this season does feel functionally different.
It does.
Than the previous seasons.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's the problem ultimately with the final season, is because in a lot of ways, you know, what we've alluded to during the shows and even in some of our past episodes is like, this particular season, it's like a slow march to the end where we are all anticipating the finale. I've even listened to other podcasters covering Lower Decks to see what people say, and everyone's enjoying Lower Decks.
Yeah. I mean,
but you know what's weird,
Mike? It's not like no one hate watches this, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
no one hate watches it. But the thing that everyone, all the shows that I've listened to, and even like people that talk to Lower Decks, everyone's like going, this is kind of like a bummer of a season. There's like a bummer that you feel where it's like, oh man, we're not going to get another season of these guys after this.
Yeah.
And me and you have discussed about this where it's like, yeah, we entered this season going, we're happy to see this season, but and Mike McMahon's doing a good job so far with a lot of the writing. His writing team's been really strong for 5 episodes, but there's like this cloud that just hangs over the season.
A far cloud.
A far cloud.
Yeah.
But it just hangs over it, and it kind of like brings everyone down.
Yeah. We're all trying to, hot air rises, so we're trying to all stay away
Stay
from the
away
fart,
from the fart cloud.
the fart cloud. Yeah. All right, David. Well, that's pretty much it for this discussion. I'm going to give it an 80%. It wasn't a horrible episode. I'm definitely not hate watching, but it's also not the best work they have done on this show.
Mm-hmm.
David?
I'm with you there. I actually scored this as an 80. It's the lowest episode of the season for me, but it does really hammer home a lot of the notions that a lot of what we've been discussing about is like, what is the overall story about this? And up to episode 5, it is, I think, about like these crew growing out of the show.
Yeah.
That is ultimately what it is like after Lower Decks, whether we get some fans have been wanting, hey, can we get a full-length feature or a film?
What? Of what?
Of Lower Decks?
No, thank you. We don't.
And
need
I'm like
that.
going,
what?
Well, let's not go too far. But like, if we see these characters, they're going to make a jump somewhere to live action. Somewhere.
Yeah, that's fine, but we don't need. Come on, with all of the
Can you
potential
imagine?
movies, this
Can
is
you
what
imagine?
they give us.
Yeah, can you imagine if
Next summer, Lower Decks. Like, no, thank you.
Feature film. We'll be there. We'll be there.
No, I won't. I'm like, fuck this. You guys are just fucking with us now. All right. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Live long and prosper.